Hello and welcome to Catalyze Music Academy. My name is Zaak Kerstetter. I'm an Ableton Certified Trainer, and this is going to be part 2 of a series that I'll be doing about how to integrate hardware modular synthesizers and Ableton Live. So if you haven't gone ahead and watched the first video, I recommend checking that out. We're going to be building off of a lot of concepts that I covered in the previous video. On top of that, before we get too deep into it, if you are enjoying this kinds of content, please feel free to let me know in the comment section below. And as always, like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff really helps me grow the channel. So in the last video, we were talking a little bit about how we can use either a MIDI controller or just MIDI in Live to basically play our modular synthesizer. However, one of the prime benefits of using modular is that there's a bunch of really cool options for sequencing inside of your hardware. So what I want to show you today is how you can basically tempo sync everything on your hardware with Live, and that way if you're sequencing, say, your drums in Live and everything else on your hardware synthesizer, you can kind of make sure the two sync up together and everything flows together really nicely, and you don't need to worry about latency or things like not being on time. So to do this, once again, we're going to be jumping right into our CV Tools pack. If you have not downloaded this pack, I highly recommend checking out if you're going to be using any kind of modular synthesizers. And under the utilities, there's going to be a CV Clock Out, which is a really handy device, and you can toss this on pretty much any channel you want. It doesn't really matter where it goes. And once this loads up, we can see we have both a clock out and a transport out. We'll be using both of these in just a little bit. Before we set up our clock out, over here we can change how it sequences or how it sends out that information between normal, odds, and PPQN, which is pulses per quarter note. Different pieces of gear might prefer different timings here, so it really kind of depends on which gear you're using. I already know for a fact that the module I'm going to be using likes to respond to pulses per quarter note, so I'm going to set that up. And I also already know it likes to respond to 48 pulses per quarter note, because again, that's what I've kind of set it up to do. Once I've done that, I can go over to this clock and we can switch this to be an external output, which is going to be, once again, my ES9 audio interface. And we're going to send this out output number 16. So now if we take a look here, this is going to be sending out clock information that I can use to sequence any module that is going to respond to timing. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be sending out here, I'm going to send this into my Pam's new workout. This is a really handy module that does a lot of different things, but we're going to primarily be using this to sequence multiple sequencers all simultaneously. So we're going to go ahead and send this out here, and then send this into the clock input on the Pam's. And so now you can see if I stop Live, nothing is going, nothing's blinking, but once I hit the spacebar to start it, all these are going to be blinking and kind of being like different divisions of the clock, although it can do a lot more than that. On top of that, there's this little red box here. You probably can't really see it on the camera, but this is displaying the tempo in BPM. And if I change the tempo in Live, say I were to start turning it down, we're going to start seeing all my dividers are going to be much slower now because I'm turning down my tempo. And then if I turn it back up, they're going to be speeding up. So not only does it start on time, but also if I change the tempo of Live, my global BPM, all of the outputs here will change in time with it, which is really, really handy. So we're going to take one of these outputs here. Let's take this one, and I'm going to plug this into my Qubit Bloom, which is going to be my primary sequencer for this example, which has a clock input right here. So if I put this in here, now if I hit play in Live, not only is the Pam's starting to sequence, but also my Bloom is sequencing, and we can see here this little light is going to be blinking going from top to bottom. This is right now just an 8-step sequence, and I can use these knobs to change the pitch essentially. So now that I have that working, I need to send this to an oscillator. So we have an output right here. We're going to send this out and into the volt per octave of my Instro TSL. This is the voice or the oscillator I'm going to be using. So this will now generate a sound. And we can just go ahead and take this output, let's do the square wave output, and we can put it into the input here of my ES9. Now I'm going to go ahead and once again use the CV instrument, although you could also use like the external instrument device. We're going to grab, before I turn this on, I'm going to turn the volume down because it's going to be loud. I'm going to grab the volume from inputs number 1, and now we can hear it's sequencing. And if I start changing the notes here, I can start putting together a sequence. However, there's a couple big issues we need to deal with. Number 1, it's always playing, even if I stop my sequence here. So I'm going to turn this all the way down. So what we're going to do, instead of running our audio directly out of our TSL, we're going to run it through the Vinsa, which is a VCA, which is right next to it. So I'm going to run this to the input here, and then I'm going to send the output here. A VCA is essentially going to allow us to control our volume. So now I can, if I turn this up, use this guy right here to control the volume. On top of that, I could also send an input here to start triggering it, so it's not just playing constantly. So to do that, we're going to need some sort of envelope, and I'm going to be using the peak up here, this 1U module here, and I'm going to have a gate output of my balloon that every time a note triggers, every time there's a new note in my sequence, it will send an output. And if I try plugging it directly into my VCA, it's going to be really quick and choppy, and it's not going to sound good. Like that, which is not what we want. So we want to control that gate over time. So we're going to plug it in up here, and then we're going to send this from here into our VCA. And now when I hit play, number one, we don't get constant volume, which is great. Number two, so I'm just using this as an attack decay. It's being triggered by the gate coming out here, and then we're sending that into our VCA to make that move up and down over time. So that's what all we're doing here. And now I have a sequence, and I can start customizing the sequence and changing it on the fly until I find something that I like. However, there is one more really big issue that needs to be addressed. And the way this works is essentially this sequence doesn't reset. When I hit play in live, every time I hit the spacebar, kind of resets. But here, every time I hit stop and then start, it's just continuing the sequence from where it started, or where it was. So what I'm going to do to fix that is down here I have a transport control. So I can set this to go once again out to the ES9 and then to a different output. Now this is going to basically allow me to reset my sequences, or make it so that when I hit play in live, the sequencers start at the beginning. And realistically, there's two ways to do this. Traditionally, when I'm doing this, if I'm sequencing multiple sequencers together, I would send this out and then send it to PAMs, and then PAMs would then send out a signal to my sequencers. But because I'm only using this one for right now, I'm going to plug this in directly to the reset. So that means if I hit play, every time I hit play, it's going to restart at the beginning, which is exactly what I want. And if we can check this with the metronome, so great, everything's starting on time, it's staying on time, and if I were to say start layering this with a drum beat, and I can start sequencing in whatever I want, and I can be pretty confident it's going to, again, start on time, it's going to stay on time, and if I change tempos in live, stays on time with it. So everything's synced together, so I can sequence, get creative with my sequencers, mix in some other modulation hardware in there, other modules, and make something that fits together and stays in time with the song I'm writing in live. So that way I get kind of the best of both worlds. I can do my drums in live, do my bass here, and mix and match and kind of figure out, some situations I want to use more hardware, sometimes situations I want to use more software, but no matter what, they all sync together and they go together pretty nicely. So that's it. Hopefully that is useful for you. Again, if you are interested in getting more into modular synthesis and hardware, having something like the ES9 and the CV tools is really, really handy for making sure everything flows together. And again, there are other ways to sequence in live, but I found that this way works really, really well. Ever since I kind of figured out the basics here, everything's been pretty smooth. I haven't had to worry about like latency or timing or anything like that, which sometimes can be a headache with hardware. So this setup works really well for doing exactly what I'm going to be doing with my hardware and with live. So again, thanks for watching. Hopefully that was useful for you. And if you are interested in learning more about modular synthesis, feel free to leave that in the comment section below, and I'll try to cover those kinds of topics in the future.